Hello, thank you for participating in this training session today. You're about to begin this module, which provides in-depth guidance to you as a supervisor on HR compliance topics. This presentation is brought to you by Cura HR, your HR consulting partner. As a supervisor with Signia, you play an important role in making sure that the policies and practices we have in place are adhered to, and that if you have any questions or are unsure about what to do, that you contact senior leadership or human resources. You are the eyes and ears of the organization. In this module, we will cover the following topics: preventing discrimination in the workplace, workplace harassment for supervisors, FLSA, FMLA, diversity, and unconscious bias. We know you are the first line to receive questions from employees, and by the end of this session, you should feel confident knowing how to respond to questions and when to escalate. Our first topic focuses on workplace discrimination. Both federal and state laws prohibit discrimination on the job and help provide equal employment opportunity for minorities, women, older workers, and people with disabilities. Despite the fact that the laws have been around for many years, workplace discrimination still occurs. Many people still do not get the employment opportunities they deserve on the basis of their skills and abilities simply because of their race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, or disability. Signia supports equal opportunity and works hard to comply with workplace discrimination laws, but we can't succeed without your help. You play a very important role in making sure our workplace is free of discrimination. The main objective of this session is to help you better understand the requirements of discrimination laws so that you can help us prevent workplace discrimination. By the time this session is over, you should be able to understand what workplace discrimination is and why it is illegal, recognize the requirements of discrimination laws, identify different types of discrimination, and help the organization prevent discrimination in the workplace. Workplace discrimination laws protect people against employment discrimination and provide equal opportunity in the workplace. The laws protect job candidates and employees from discrimination based on the protected characteristics listed on the slide. There are multiple federal laws that are in place which prohibit workplace discrimination laws, such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits workplace discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, or sex. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act prohibits discrimination against pregnant employees and job candidates. The Equal Pay Act requires men and women to be paid the same for equal work. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based on disabilities and requires employers to accommodate otherwise qualified individuals to help them perform their jobs. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act prohibits discrimination that's based on the genetic information of applicants, employees, or their family members. And the Age Discrimination in Employment Act prohibits discrimination against employees and job candidates 40 years of age and older. Specific state laws also prevent workplace discrimination. Workplace discrimination is illegal for three important reasons. The first is that discrimination is unfair. It treats people differently on the basis of characteristics that have little or nothing to do with their ability to perform a job. Discrimination is also illegal because it denies employment opportunities to qualified individuals. Everyone wants to get ahead and succeed on the job. Why should someone be denied that right because they are Black or Hispanic or Muslim? Because they are female or because they have a disability that does not affect their ability to perform the job, or just because they are past a certain age. Furthermore, employment discrimination hurts organizations and everyone who works there, even those who are not discriminated against. That's because discrimination may prevent some of the most talented, skilled, and capable people from getting jobs. And when that happens, everyone suffers. Workplace discrimination laws prohibit organizations from basing employment decisions on anything other than an individual's qualifications and abilities. This means that employers can't take a person's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, or genetic information into account when dealing with employees or job applicants. It also means that disabilities must be accommodated whenever possible. In addition, organizations can't apply different standards or apply standards differently to different individuals because of their race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, or genetic information. Discrimination laws also prohibit any type of workplace harassment of employees in these protected groups. They also prohibit employees from harassing their coworkers. In addition, the laws say that employers can't retaliate against any employee for engaging in protected activities, such as filing discrimination charges or testifying in hearings and court proceedings concerning discrimination charges. Specifically, the laws say that organizations can't discriminate in recruiting, hiring, or pre-employment testing. They can't fire employees just because of their race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, disability, or genetic information. The law requires that decisions to promote, transfer, lay off, or recall an employee can't be based on the employee's protected characteristics, i.e., race or sex. Disciplinary action must be based on the organization's policy and the employee's performance or behavior as objectively documented, not on whether the employee is a man or a woman, Black or white, Muslim or Christian, Hispanic or European origin, or other protected characteristics. Who gets trained is also an issue. In many cases where workplace discrimination has been found, minority and female employees did not have equal access to training opportunities that often led to new job assignments and promotions. Finally, organizations cannot discriminate in pay or benefits because of an employee's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, disability, or genetic information. Of course, not everybody gets paid the same, but the differences must be based on objective, work-related reasons, not bias. Laws are not the only thing that prohibits workplace discrimination. Our discrimination policy prohibits workplace discrimination and requires professional conduct. Our policy supports equal employment opportunity under the law. It does not tolerate any kind of workplace discrimination for any reason. The policy requires supervisors and employees to obey the law. It also urges us all to treat others professionally and respectfully. Our policy includes a complaint procedure that allows anyone who feels they have been discriminated against or harassed to report the problem to leadership. All complaints will be taken seriously and investigated. Do not be afraid to report problems. Our policy prohibits retaliation for reporting discrimination or harassment. Anyone who is found to be responsible for illegal workplace discrimination will be disciplined and may even be fired. This includes employees who engage in harassment of coworkers. You play a very important role in helping the organization prevent workplace discrimination and comply with discrimination laws. The most important thing you can do is understand and follow our discrimination policy. If we all do that, we won't have any problems. It's also important to recognize each person as an individual and avoid stereotyped thinking about coworkers who may be different from us. We ask all employees to treat everyone in the organization with respect and courtesy at all times. We also ask you to be aware of your biases, if any, and try to correct them. Many of us grew up hearing things from family and neighbors that might reflect badly on people of different races, religions, or nationalities. As adults, we need to form our own views and learn to accept everyone in the workplace on an equal basis. If you see or hear coworkers engaging in harassing or discriminatory behavior, tell them to stop. A racist joke, making fun of someone who has a disability, or putting someone down because of his or her ethnic origin or religion violates our policy, and it may also be a violation of the law. As a supervisor, here are the main points to remember from this session on preventing workplace discrimination. Workplace discrimination is illegal. It denies employment opportunities to qualified people. Discrimination hurts everyone in the organization, not just those who are discriminated against. Do your part to help prevent workplace discrimination. Our next topic focuses on harassment in the workplace. Harassment is a disturbing problem that has a negative impact not only on victims, but also on the entire workplace. There are many kinds of harassment, all of them against the law and our organization's policy. One of the most common is sexual harassment. But today, we're going to talk about the kind of harassment that arises from the diversity of American society. We're going to talk about harassment on the job because of a person's race, color, religion, or national or ethnic origin. The main objective of this session is to help you understand the nature of harassment in the workplace, how you can help prevent it, and what to do if, despite our best efforts, it occurs in our organization. By the time this session is over, you should be able to understand the requirements of the law and company policy, identify incidents of workplace harassment, handle complaints effectively, and take appropriate corrective action. During this session, we'll discuss several items such as what harassment is, why it's a problem, compliance with the law, procedures for dealing with harassment, and the actions you need to take to stop harassment and correct its effects. Harassment on the job is a very real and serious problem. It shows up in workplaces large and small in all states. Unfortunately, despite many years of civil rights action, implementation of federal and state fair employment laws, and considerable progress on the part of most employers to combat employment discrimination, bias remains a pervasive and damaging problem in the workplace. In fact, the number of harassment complaints filed with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, and state fair employment agencies has risen significantly. For example, in recent years, there has been a 5-fold increase in racial harassment charges and a 10-fold increase in the number of racial harassment cases going to court. Furthermore, resentment of people from countries associated with terrorism has caused a new wave of harassment, and many workers of other ethnic origins also suffer from harassment on the job. Workplace harassment can take many forms. For example, racial and ethnic slurs, threats, racial and ethnic jokes and labels, and derogatory comments about people because of their religion or background. Often the harassment comes from coworkers, but sometimes members of management, especially supervisors, are also involved. Harassment is unwelcome behavior directed at a person or group because of race, color, religion, or national or ethnic origin. As we mentioned at the beginning of this session, workplace harassment can also involve gender. Sometimes it can be based on a person's age, disability, or sexual orientation. Harassment usually involves a pattern of behavior, something that occurs repeatedly over time. Although, as we'll see a little bit later, one serious incident could be enough to trigger an investigation. When this type of behavior is directed against anyone in any of the groups we've just mentioned, it is a form of illegal employment discrimination in violation of Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act and state employment laws. Harassment is often blatant. For example, jokes, slurs, labels, graffiti, derogatory comments, or threats. But it can also be subtle. So subtle, in fact, that it may take a while to be sure that a pattern of harassment really exists. For example, it may take the form of veiled comments, subtle intimidation, and language or behavior that might seem at first to be meant just in fun, a little harmless teasing, nothing more. But behind that might lurk some very unpleasant attitudes that eventually come out in overt behavior. Finally, it's important to note that harassment in its broadest sense can involve behavior that falls short of statutory discrimination. Although some types of behavior might not be against the law and might not be considered harassment in a court of law, that doesn't mean we condone that kind of behavior in our organization. For example, harassing someone because of their weight or because of the way they dress or talk or because of some other feature or characteristic will not be tolerated. Rude, insensitive, or abusive behavior directed against an employee for whatever reason is unprofessional and inappropriate. We expect all employees to treat one another with courtesy and respect. Having said what harassment is, it's also important to be clear about what harassment is not. Harassment is not occasional teasing, even though that is something you would want to put a stop to when it comes to your attention. Occasional teasing is not the same thing as the behavior we've been describing as harassment. Generally, an offhand comment, something that might be said once in anger or out of careless disregard for another person's feelings, does not qualify as harassment either. For example, a stray remark about a specific covered group would not constitute illegal harassment, even if it was overheard by a person within that group. That said, if you hear comments like this, it is still your responsibility to discuss appropriate language with the employee. Minor, isolated incidents are generally not considered harassment, even if they are directed against someone in a protected group. For example, if someone once told a joke offensive to a religious person without having a history of saying such things, it is unlikely that EEOC or anyone else would consider this harassment. Remember that harassment usually involves a pattern of behavior, something that happens over and over, day in and day out. Again, though, as a supervisor, you are expected to pull the employee aside to set expectations and help to reinforce that continued jokes on the topic are not acceptable. Again, as an organization, we want to be clear that just because some offhand comments or one-time jokes may not be defined as harassment, it does not mean we tolerate language or actions which could make others uncomfortable or could be repeated. We just talked about some circumstances that wouldn't rise to the level of illegal harassment. Now let's talk about the circumstances that would. One extremely serious incident might be considered harassment if, for example, an employee were to be physically threatened by a coworker for racial or ethnic reasons, even if it only occurred once. An incident like that is so serious that it would have to be fully investigated. Generally, however, as we've said, harassment involves a pattern of behavior, a pattern that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment for the target. For example, constant abusive language day in and day out directed at a person of color or a person of a particular religion or ethnic background would amount to what a court might say was severe and pervasive, and therefore constitute illegal harassment. Conduct on the part of supervisors or coworkers that unreasonably interferes with an employee's work performance is also considered illegal harassment if it is directed at a member of a protected group. For example, if an employee is so upset by continual put-downs or racially offensive language used by coworkers that he or she can't concentrate on the job, and if the employee's supervisor turns a blind eye to the behavior, this would be a situation that a court would likely rule was illegal harassment. We would find such behavior reprehensible no matter who the target was. Of course, whether it was someone protected by statute or simply by the law of decency. Our policy requires professional conduct from all employees at all times. Harassment might also take the form of negatively affecting an individual's employment opportunities. For example, if a Black employee was repeatedly denied promotions and was told by his supervisor that his kind shouldn't expect to get ahead in the organization, that would also be a form of illegal harassment. Harassment of individuals who do not conform to traditional stereotypes is also unlawful if it creates a hostile work environment. For example, one federal court ruled that an employee's coworkers created a hostile work environment when they harassed him for wearing an earring and exhibiting characteristics that did not follow their views of masculinity. According to EEOC, if employers and employees discharge their respective duties and act reasonably, unlawful harassment can be prevented in most cases. If an organization has an effective complaint and investigation process, harassment problems can usually be stopped and corrected long before a company is hauled into court. Facing liability for illegal harassment. We follow our obligation to report expectation for this very reason. Employers are generally held liable for harassment by supervisors and managers. An individual qualifies as an employee's supervisor if the individual has authority to undertake or recommend tangible employment decisions affecting the employee. An individual is also considered a supervisor if he or she has the authority to direct the employee's daily work activities. An individual who is temporarily authorized to direct another employee's daily work activities, like a team or project leader, could also qualify as a supervisor during that period. If that person harassed a coworker, the company could be held liable. Although Title VII does not subject supervisors and managers to personal liability for discrimination, many state and local laws do impose personal liability. A company could also be held liable for harassment of employees by coworkers if management knew or should have known about the misconduct and failed to take corrective action. For example, if company restrooms are full of racist graffiti, a court would likely rule that the employer knew or should have known about the problem. In another example, let's say a supervisor knows that employees are harassing a coworker. If the supervisor does nothing about the problem, then the company could be found liable for the continuing harassment because the supervisor knew and that means, as far as the courts are concerned, the company knew. The standard in the case of harassment by non-employees, such as customers and vendors, is similar to that of harassment by coworkers. Of course, employers don't have as much control over outsiders as they do over employees, so it would generally be tougher to prove a case of harassment. But a company could be found liable for harassment by non-employees if anyone in management knew about the problem or if the employee had complained and the company failed to act on the complaint. In most cases, you will be the first person in a leadership role an employee comes to with a complaint about harassment. Our harassment complaint process is designed to encourage victims to come forward. To achieve this goal, you must clearly explain the complaint procedure to your employees and ensure that there are no obstacles to filing a complaint. Never ignore any complaint or try to discourage an employee from filing a complaint. When an employee comes to you about a harassment problem, you need to bring it to the attention of a senior leader or HR right away so that the complaint can be properly investigated. Once an employee comes to you with a complaint, a court would say that the organization has been officially put on notice. The organization could therefore be held liable on the basis that it knew or should have known about the harassment. Understand that employees are allowed to bypass the normal chain of command when making harassment complaints. This is because sometimes the harasser is a supervisor. Allowing employees to bypass the chain of command provides additional assurance that complaints will be handled impartially. Make it clear to employees that their complaints will be handled confidentially to the extent possible. In order to conduct an effective investigation, certain information might have to be revealed to the alleged harasser or to potential witnesses. However, information about a complaint should only be shared with those who need to know. Records relating to harassment complaints should be kept confidential on the same basis. Finally, remember that we have a duty to protect everyone's rights in these situations, including the alleged harassers. Until someone has admitted particular conduct or until an investigation determines that the conduct has occurred, you need to keep an open mind. Alleged means accused, not proven. Please be familiar with the proper procedure for reporting harassment complaints. Remember, you can encourage employees to contact the Tell Us reporting line at any time. If an investigation is conducted and determines that harassment has occurred in violation of company policy and the law, we must take immediate and appropriate corrective action. In most cases, the action to be taken will be explained to you by those who conducted the investigation. But if it's up to you to determine what corrective action to take, be sure to talk it over with your supervisor before you act. The action you take must effectively stop the harassment, correct its effects on the victim, and ensure that the problem does not recur. The remedial measures you take need not necessarily be those that the victim requests or prefers, for example, firing a harasser, as long as the steps you take are effective in permanently stopping the harassment. In determining disciplinary action, we must make sure to balance competing concerns. Discipline should be severe enough to put an end to the behavior, but disciplinary measures also need to be in proportion to the seriousness of the offense. In serious cases, suspension or discharge might be appropriate. In less serious cases, a written warning and counseling might be enough. Whatever action is taken, the law says that it must not adversely affect the victim of the harassment. Remedial measures must, however, stop the harasser and ensure that this person does not behave in this way again. Depending on the seriousness of the offense, such measures might include verbal or written warning, demotion, transfer or reassignment, suspension, training, or counseling to ensure the harasser understands the company policy and why the behavior was in violation of the policy, and ongoing monitoring to make sure the harassment has indeed stopped. Remedial measures should also correct the effects of the harassment. You need to put the victim back in the position he or she would have been in had the misconduct not occurred. Remedial measures might therefore include an apology letter from the harasser, restoration of leave time taken because of the harassment, removal of any negative evaluations in an employee's file that arose from the harassment by a supervisor, reinstatement if the victim quit or lost his or her job as a result of the harassment, monitoring treatment of the employee to make sure that he or she is not subjected to retaliation by the harasser or others in the workplace because of the complaint, and correction of any other harm caused by the harassment, for example, compensation for any losses directly resulting from the harassment. Finally, follow up with both parties until you are convinced that the remedial measures have been effective and the problem has been completely resolved. Here are the main points to remember from this session on workplace harassment. Illegal harassment is unwelcome behavior directed at a person because of race, color, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, or sex. No rude, insensitive, or abusive behavior of any kind should be tolerated, even if it falls short of illegal harassment. You play a critical role in identifying harassment, investigating incidents, taking corrective action, and enforcing company policy. This concludes the workplace harassment portion of the training session. Let's continue on to the next topic of our session to discuss the Fair Labor and Standards Act and Cignia's requirements for overtime, rest and meal breaks, and timekeeping accuracy. The FLSA establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, and youth employment standards affecting employees in the private sector and in federal, state, and local governments. The minimum wage is established by the FLSA. Many states also have varying minimum wage laws. In cases where an employee is subject to both state and federal minimum wage laws, the employee is entitled to the higher minimum wage. Covered non-exempt employees are eligible for overtime pay and must receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 per work week at a rate not less than 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. The FLSA does not require overtime pay for work on weekends, holidays, or regular days of rest, unless overtime is worked on such days. For all overtime calculations, paid leave, holidays, vacation, sick, bereavement, and jury duty do not apply towards work time. Hours worked ordinarily include all the time during which an employee is required to be on the employer's premises, on duty, or at a prescribed workplace. Record-keeping requirements mandate that employers must display an official poster outlining the requirements of the FLSA. Employers must also keep employee time and pay records. Cignia adheres to the FLSA and labor law requirements for rest and meal breaks for non-exempt employees. Employees are granted a paid 10-minute rest period for each 4-hour work period or major infraction thereof. And a meal period is given and means that a period of not less than 30 minutes time during which an employee is relieved of all work duties and not subject to the control of the employer. Please note, encouraging employees to take breaks increases morale and productivity. Every covered employer must keep certain records for each non-exempt worker. The Act requires no particular form for the records, but does require that the records include certain identifying and accurate information about the employee and data about the hours worked and the wages earned. Employers may use any timekeeping method they choose. For example, they may use a time clock or tell their workers to write their own times on the records. Any timekeeping plan is acceptable as long as it's complete and accurate. As a supervisor, you are responsible for reviewing and approving all employee time cards by the deadline, asking employees for clarification and/or making corrections before approval. Reporting all suspicious timekeeping concerns to HR is also mandatory. Now we'll move to our next topic, which is the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, eligibility and internal processes. FMLA requires certain employers to grant unpaid leaves of absence to qualified workers for certain medical and family-related reasons. FMLA provides eligible employees up to 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected leave in any 12-month period for certain medical and family-related reasons. Cigna complies with the federal FMLA regulations and by any state and local leave laws. The more generous laws will apply to the employee if the employee is eligible under both federal and state laws. The FMLA defines eligible employees as employees who have worked for the company for at least 12 months and for at least 1,250 hours, and work at or report at a work site which has 50 or more employees or is within 75 miles of company work sites that have a combined total of 50 or more employees. The FMLA also includes a special leave entitlement that permits eligible employees to take up to 26 weeks of leave to care for a covered service member. FMLA leave is unpaid leave. However, if you have sick time, vacation time, or personal time saved up with the company, you may use that leave time along with your FMLA leave so that you continue to get paid. In order to use such leave, follow Cigna's normal leave rules, such as submitting a leave form or providing advance notice for approval of the time off. Employees have a responsibility in initiating the FMLA process. Employees may ask you about the leave of absence process, or they may contact senior leadership or HR. Upon inquiring about leave of absence, you may provide basic steps to help them get started in submitting a formal request. Employees must provide 30 days advance notice of the need to take FMLA leave when the leave is foreseeable. If not, the employee must provide notice as soon as practicable and generally must comply with the company's normal call-in procedure. The company may delay leave to employees who do not provide proper advance notice of the foreseeable need for leave. In order to formalize the leave request, employees do not have to share a medical diagnosis, but must provide sufficient information to the company so it can determine if the leave qualifies for FMLA. Employees may also be required to provide a certification supporting the need for leave. When you or employees return to work, the FMLA requires that your employer return you to the same job that you left, or one that is nearly identical. Depending on the type of leave, employees may be required to submit a release to return to work. As a takeaway, here are a few key points to remember about FMLA. Do not assume eligibility or approve or deny FMLA leave. Instead, let HR or leadership make the decision. Notify HR or leadership when you become aware that an employee is requesting time off for a serious health condition or eligible family-related concern. Remember that the reasons underlying an FMLA leave are often sensitive, so be mindful of confidentiality. Do not require employees on FMLA leave to work. Know that FMLA guarantees that the employee will be restored to the same or equivalent position at the end of their leave. Ensure that no one is retaliated against for exercising FMLA rights. Our next topic is diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes abbreviated to DEI. I am certain that you have all heard something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, commonly referred to as DEI, which has most recently taken center stage in the workplace. As leaders, we must actively work to create meaningful change in spite of the history of injustice that has marginalized underrepresented groups within the workplace. As employers, we need to make sure we're including these individuals and that we're giving them equity. We need to make sure that not only do they have a job, but they have the same ability to get promoted, to contribute, and have the same impact in the workplace as their peers. DEI is vital to creating and maintaining a successful workplace, one founded on the principle that all people can thrive personally and professionally. Before implementing new practices, it's important that you fully understand each component of DEI, both individually and how they work together. What is diversity? For a moment, let's replace the word diverse with the word different. Diversity is about the differences between people within your team, the community you live in, and other groups. No matter where you live or what team you are a part of, the important takeaway for you to hear today is that there are many ways in which we can be diverse. Diversity is not just about the EEO categories we just talked about, like race, ethnicity, and gender. DE&I extends far beyond race and gender to include, among other things, like age, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. When thinking about diversity, consider religious beliefs, socioeconomic background, and even neurodiversity, the differences in thinking and communicating styles, and other attributes of the people you work with and interact with on a daily basis. Along with diversity comes a variety of characteristics and perspectives. Think about the way different people approach problem solving. Some people are more idealistic and creative, always coming up with new ideas. Others are more realistic and skeptical, always researching those ideas. How many of you had the image of a coworker in your mind just now? We work with people who have different backgrounds, come from different places, have different beliefs, think differently, learn differently, and are different. One thing to remember is that a person is not diverse, and there is no such thing as a diverse job candidate. Diversity is a relational concept that shows up in the composition of a team or an organization and is measured based on a whole group. Now we will move to equality, equity, and justice. I will start with what equity is not. Equity is not treating everyone equally. Equality is represented on the left side of this picture. Each person has the same size box to stand on so they can attempt to see the game. Being equal or the same actually maintains inequity. Equity and equality mean very different things and lead to differences and results. When we treat everyone equitably, we focus on individualistic needs. The picture in the middle illustrates that each of these three individuals had different needs, And when those needs are met, we see equity. Also included for your knowledge and consideration is the illustration on the right, which represents justice. In this image, all three individuals can see the game without accommodations because the systemic barrier has been removed. The cause of inequity was addressed. We just discussed diversity. In a diverse workplace, differences exist and people require support in different ways. Equity asks us to acknowledge that everyone has different needs, experiences, and opportunities. Let's think about equality another way. Say, Signia orders t-shirts for every employee and the shirts are all the same size, medium. They're equal, but the shirts will fit some employees better than others, and some employees may feel more at home in them than others. Equality assumes that preset sizes will work for everyone. If we move another step towards equity, we encourage employees to do what they can to make the shirts work. Some may roll up the sleeves, tuck the shirt in, or tie a knot to shorten it, while other people may not even be able to put the shirt on over their head due to the size, shape, or abilities of their body. If the situation were to be handled equitably instead, each employee would be able to order their own size. Perhaps even further on the equity spectrum, what if Signia were to give choices so that employees could have a shirt if they liked it and it fit, but they might instead choose a pin or a backpack or a water bottle? Here, everyone has swag that works for them. In the workplace, we might see equity in different ways. We might post safety posters in both English and Spanish, or encourage an employee with dyslexia to use voice to text instead of typing emails. We might adjust a parent's schedule so they can manage childcare or work with an employee to take more frequent breaks. And what about inclusion? If you think of diversity as being invited to the party, then inclusion is being asked to dance. Note that a group can be diverse without being inclusive. Inclusion is about the quality of each person's experience. Diverse workplaces acknowledge that there may be some people who participate in religion or spiritual activities during the day. Inclusion means creating a space for people who feel welcome to partake in their own activities in a safe space. We need to understand what people need to feel valued and included, improve the human experience, and consider these needs in our policies, processes, and physical spaces. To take this analogy a step further, we can revisit equity. This is having the proper fitting shoes to participate in the dance. And wouldn't it be great if we felt belonging? If we were all respected for our dance moves, what we wore to the dance, and who we were dancing with, regardless what any of that looks or feels like. And then it happening consistently over every dance. I challenge each of you to think about DEI in your teams, your departments, and in the organization. If everyone does their part to prioritize DEI at Signia, it will make a great difference. We are not done yet. We can talk endlessly about diversity and inclusion. The fact is, unless we address implicit biases, it will never make much of an impact. And that ends our overview and introduction to diversity, equity, inclusion, and leads us to our final topic. What is unconscious bias? Let's find out. Our final topic of the session is unconscious bias, also known as implicit bias, and is the unconscious form of discrimination and stereotyping. It is important to note that biases, conscious or unconscious, are not limited to ethnicity and race. Though racial bias and discrimination is well documented, biases may exist toward towards any social group: one's age, gender, gender identity, physical abilities, religion, sexual orientation, weight, and many other characteristics are subject to bias. There are many examples featured on the slide. Examples of unconscious bias in the workplace are common. Have you ever worked with or hired someone who reminded you of another person? It's a subtle but real form of unconscious bias. The feelings and opinions you associate with another person can easily influence the way you see someone else. As a leader, you have the responsibility to put aside past experiences and see the person as an individual. This can be difficult at times, so leaders should feel comfortable enough to ask for others' input. Letting a past experience shape your current decisions is unfair to you, the potential employee, and the company. Now, think for a moment about any underlying attitudes and stereotypes that you may unconsciously attribute to another person or group. These attitudes and stereotypes can affect the way you engage and understand that person or group. These stereotypes can be inherent or learned and can form without you even realizing it. In fact, your unconscious bias may not even align with your conscious values. This is a tough subject because we all experience bias, and it may be hard to differentiate between logical assumptions and harmful stereotypes. There are numerous categories of unconscious bias. Here are a few brief descriptions. Affinity bias: liking people who you perceive are just like you. Any perceived connection, big or small, can result in affinity bias. Confirmation bias: these biases are realized when people attempt to prove a preconceived bias and can impact the hiring process even before the candidate walks through the door. The interviewer may have an opinion based on the university the candidate attended and develop an opinion before they meet. They may unconsciously seek confirmation of the assumptions during the interview, which sets the candidate up for failure or success. Effective heuristic: this bias occurs when people are judged as a result of superficial factors. These judgments can be very detrimental to the hiring process. Examples include piercings, tattoos, hairstyle, and weight. And the halo effect: this occurs when you think that someone is a good person just because you like them. Remember, no one is perfect. When you have halo effect bias, you may overlook gaps in a resume, overlook lack of experience or skills, or would be a good fit for the team. Groupthink: this occurs when you lose your own identity, individuality, and thought because you forced yourself to fit into an existing culture. Groupthink often results in everyone maintaining status quo and may result in the hiring leader continuing to hire candidates who appear to fit in. Perception bias is maintaining the thought that something is true of a group of people, making it impossible to remain objective when considering an individual. Perceived gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation are common examples of perception bias. When it comes down to it, the work here is for you to be self-aware and discover. Dig deep and do some research to understand where your unconscious biases are, and then work to prevent them from affecting your decisions as a supervisor and as an employee. As a takeaway, here are a few key points to remember about diversity, equity, inclusion, and unconscious bias. For employers and HR professionals, one of the biggest challenges is knowing where to start. Realize that there is no quick fix. Achieving true diversity takes time and effort, and you can't underestimate the importance of inclusion and equity. Without those two pieces, you're not going to achieve true diversity. Understanding how each element of DEI builds upon the others is important to creating a work environment that is equitable and inclusive of all individuals. Just like DEI is a multifaceted process, it also incorporates the historic mindset which has always been to avoid talking about these things. The call to action is about understanding how to navigate that discomfort and how to use that to elevate the workforce. It's about doing the important work that is long overdue and becoming inclusive and equitable. Another point to remember is slow down. Our brains can consciously process only around 40 items of information per second, but as many as 11 million things unconsciously. So when we rush our choices, our brains rely on shortcuts, biases, to make decision-making easier and quicker. Lessen the risk of these biases affecting your decision by slowing down and giving yourself more time to arrive at conclusions. This bias happens in a split second, so while to an outsider the bias may be evident, the one holding this bias may or may not be doing so intentionally, due to the nature of how the brain processes it, identifies, and categorizes information. Even when we say that we are very open-minded and not prejudiced, it is clear these biases still creep up on us. This is why we need to examine our biases and be mindful of our hidden prejudices and the way they manifest themselves in words and actions. Congratulations for completing all of the topics in our session today. It's a lot of information to retain and a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. Just remember, you have a support system in place to assist you. Yes, overall, HR compliance can seem complex, but just remember, when in doubt, ask questions. Thank you for attending this session. In order to test your knowledge, you will receive a short quiz. Best of luck to you as you continue on as a successful supervisor with Signia.